Did you ever think you could quilt a large quilt with your embroidery machine? Well, now you can. Meet the shortE, the embroidery short arm with a long reach. It comes in a box, in a lightweight box, just like this. Let me introduce you to the shortE. The shortE is the embroidery short arm with a long reach. Coupled with your machine and monster snap hoop, it's a trio of perfection. The shortE holds the weight of the quilt, while Monster Snap Hoop creates the tension on the fabric, and of course the machine stitches the design. I have it set up right now for like a lap or a crib size quilt, but it can go all the way to 68 inches or more if you fold your quilt. Let me show you how to get started on the shortE. The shortE sets up in about 5 minutes. It comes with 3 adjustable plates that accommodate any size embroidery machine. All you need is a table to hold the machine and the shortE underneath. Once we apply our Velcro to our fabric rail and our leader fabric to our quilt, we're ready to quilt. The first design that we stitch is the top right corner of our border. Notice that I don't have the fabric, the quilt sandwich, attached to my back rail, but that's okay, there's no weight back here at this time, and all the tension on the quilt sandwich is created by the Monster Snap Hoop. I've centered my needle over my first template, and I'll just lift that presser foot and remove that print and stick template paper, which is awesome. And I'm going to stitch my first design. Now that my first design is finished, I can advance to this area and do a vertical border. I can also come over and do the inner quarter design. And then of course I'm going to have to rehoop my fabric. So I'll go ahead and begin these designs. Now that we've filled the hoop with all of the designs will fit in that hooping, it's time to move around to the back of the shortE and attach the leader fabric to the back fabric roll. I'm only going to secure about the 1/2 of the leader fabric because I'll need some slack over there because I still am at the top of the quilt. And then I'm just lifting the top frame of Monster Hoop, repositioning the fabric, so that I can center the needle right over the crosshair on the target, on the template. And I'm smoothing and tugging on that fabric, making sure it's secure. You want to keep an eye on the rulers on the hoop and make sure that you're square in the hoop. You most certainly could use your trace feature, do a trial run to make sure that everything is in the position that you had hoped it would be in. And I'll just move over to the center of that sticker and lift the presser foot, remove my template. These templates are so great, they're repositionable, and I'll use this through the whole quilt. And now the design will stitch from the top all the way down, fill the hoop, and then we'll reposition one more time, several more times actually on the top row. Now that I'm moving towards the center of the quilt, I'm going to have quite a bit of bulk. So I'm going to add hoop guard. You don't have to do this, but it gives you some peace of mind so you don't have to worry about the quilt roll falling into the sewing field. Okay, I'm positioned and I'm square in my hoop. I'm just going to remove that template, lower the presser foot, and sew again. I'm going to advance and stitch my last design over here in the center, and then I'll show you how to move down the quilt to the next row. We've already completed the top row and the border, and now I'm going to reattach the leader fabric on the Velcro all the way across the rail. At this time, I'll loosen the top roller bar and roll the fabric, oh, not so much, but just a little bit, and tighten that back up. I'm going to remove the monster top frame so that I can reposition the fabric, and I'll get my template in place. And that's going to be positioned right on that center line. If you're getting some slack on the bottom rail, release both handles and unroll that fabric to allow some more slack. Remember, the shortE's holding the weight of the quilt, so you don't want to create too much strain on the quilt. Just let the roller bars do their job. And I'm going to reposition that quilt, get the frame back in position. This is when that hoop guard sure comes in handy because we have quite a bit of excess fabric on the right-hand side. And just take a moment to get square in the hoop. That's where the grid comes out so handy, and there's numerous ways to mark your quilt. We'll go over that in a little bit later. And then make sure there's no pleats in the back. Work on getting your template positioned just perfectly on my grid. And then I'll move my needle to the center of the template and begin the design. And I'm going to continue all the way across this row and down the quilt, back and forth from the center to the side to the center, all the way to the bottom of the quilt. And I won't bore you with all those repeats, but I'll bring you back when we get to the bottom of the quilt. Never worry about releasing the fabric during the actual stitching. If you see some strain on the quilt, go ahead and just release that fabric rail so that the pantograph can continue to move freely. You don't want to restrict the movement of the pantograph. Okay, we have one more design to go before we flip the whole quilt and decorate the other half. So I'll just reposition this, put my template down, aligning those crosshairs with the seam line, and then drop that frame back in place. Isn't it fun that you don't even have to take the bottom hoop off when you're working on Monster Snap Hoop? You can just remove the top frame. That's why it works with the shortE. Imagine trying to re-hoop in a standard hoop every time you had to stitch another embroidery design. And I'll bring up that last design. And of course we want to position that needle right over the center. Remove the template. I have several templates that have holes in them from needle stitching on them. All right, let's re-hoop or let's remove that top frame and get it out of the way. Now it's time to flip the quilt. So let's walk to the back and release these handles on the back roller. Roll up the quilt as best you can till you feel it getting taut. And then just tighten it up again just to keep it in place. And then we'll work on the front. Release those handles and roll the quilt. And now you can go ahead and lift that off. You can manually roll it and pull it out from underneath. Release these bars. Oh, let me drop this down underneath. Pull it out. And now we take the two bars, stand them up on their ends, and flip them around. So now the roll that was on the front of the shortE is now on the back. And the one that was in the back is now in the front. I'll just set that down so I can tighten this up and it doesn't scoot away on me. And you want to clear the hoop, and of course you want to clear the needle, so just take a moment to feed the quilt sandwich underneath the needle and foot, unroll, and slip it right into that front bracket. Always remember to put it in the bracket simultaneously, right and left at the same time, so you don't torque the bracket. Now, if you remember, we started quilting from the blue side. That was our actual top of the quilt. And we went all the way down through the purple. We want to continue in the same direction. So we're now going to quilt from the green. And we'll start right here next to the center, work across and down and back and forth, just like we did the other side. So if you'll give me one moment, I'm going to go get my template and get it set up. And we'll get started on the second half. Here's my first design on the second half of the quilt. And again, just like we did the other side, we're going to reposition the fabric, keeping an eye, making sure it's square in the hoop. Center that needle over the sticker, the template. I always lower my presser foot to ensure that it's dead center. And then we'll stitch. You know, it's perfectly acceptable to adjust the fabric while it's stitching. Just keep an eye on it. You know, this isn't quilting by hand, but it is hands-on quilting. Just like you would be on a long arm, you're manipulating the fabric, you're rolling the fabric, so you're going to stay with your project while it does this. But in no time, you'll have a completed quilt, and it's such a rewarding experience to quilt a whole quilt on your embroidery machine. You'll remove the top frame and advance to the right side of the quilt, do the border when you get to it, then roll the quilt up to the next row, come back again, and continue till you get all the way to the top of the quilt, which is actually the bottom of the quilt. And then you'll be finished. I'll meet you back at that bottom border. This is our last large medallion to go on this whole quilt, so I thought I'd bring you back up to speed to show you where we are. Of course, my needle is centered over that template. I'll lower the presser foot and stitch the last one. Now you'll notice I have dropped some of the leader fabric because I need to create some slack. I don't want it to drag on the quilt or the hoop. So that really only happens when you're at the top of the quilt because there's a greater distance from the top bar to the machine bed itself. And that's to accommodate the pantograph. We have to keep the quilt elevated above the pantograph during the entire quilting process. When it gets caught underneath, that's when trouble starts. So as long as your fabric is up there, or if it's short at the top, you're in good shape. You may be noticing that the chandelier design is not perfectly aligned with the grid on some of these repeats. Forgive yourself, it's not that big of a deal. Those marks are going to go away and the eye will never be able to tell that it's 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch out of alignment. Okay, time to advance to the border. And we'll lift the frame. Now I have to release it at the front roller bar. You'll get really comfortable with this. You'll know, the quilt will tell you when to release, when to roll, when to tighten. Just don't force it. Just be gentle with it, and then you'll know exactly when to remove or release the fabric or tighten it up. You can see I'm not very square in here right now, so I'll take the time to make sure that I'm square. Borders, most certainly we want to have them vertical. And I'll go access my border design and bring that in. All of these designs come in your shortE. You'll find it on the CD that's included with your purchase. It's a great collection of embroidery designs to get started, and it looks wonderful on whole cloth quilts, on pieced quilts, you name it. Just go ahead and take a top that you've been holding on to for a long time and layer it with batting and backing, and you'll have a finished quilt in no time. Since I have this design on the screen, I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees to the right, or not. There we go, in the center of the sewing field, it'll let me rotate it. And now I'll just lift the frame and position the needle over that top mark on the border, which is exactly where I want my border to stitch. Now sometimes the magnetic hoop can get caught up on those pins. Just take your time to work around them. You could remove some of them, but not the ones that are on the leader fabric. And just smooth that out. You can make sure it's nice and straight. And then I'll just move that up to the cross mark. And we'll stitch that design. And then we'll add our corner design, and we're done our whole quilt. How fun is that? Now, in the instructions that came with the shortE, there's some tips on how to set up your quilt. And you'll notice that our border design is not going all the way to the absolute edge of the border fabric. We've included some excess border fabric there to give you some leeway for stitching the border. And once it's taken off the shortE and the leader fabric, you'll trim that away and add the proper seam allowance for your binding. And one more corner design and we can call it a day. As I access my small border design, you know, it is a very small design and I have a big hoop on here. I don't have to have my needle centered over the mark that designates the center of that border design at this time. So because it's so small, I can just move out to it. So don't stress. It's best to have the batting and backing secured in monster frame so that you know, it'll hold the quilt during the embroidery process. And then we'll just stitch that design. That's it. The whole quilt is complete.